Just a quick one. Give me a second to tell you about the proud sponsor of the Hodcast, Site Ready Solutions. In construction, a world where time is tight and quality matters, there's no room for passengers. Site Ready Solutions are changing the game. They're not just getting people into the industry, they're getting them ready to deliver from day one. It all starts in the community, attracting local people who might never have thought of themselves being on a construction site. Then they're given real training, hands-on, hard graft, and to high standards. They're placed where they're needed the most, with the right mindset, skills, and the ability to be productive from day one. Then, importantly, they're retained through ongoing support and mentoring through progression. Because Site Ready Solutions don't just build workers, they build teams, they build trust, and they build futures. From street to site, they're helping everyday people become site-ready professionals, productive, prepared, and proud from the very first day they step on the job. Site Ready Solutions, local people, real skills, day one impact. Visit sitereadysolutions.co.uk and see how they're rebuilding the future of the construction industry, one person at a time. Thanks for listening. Justin, your journey into tax and coaching isn't just a career pivot. It's like a full identity shift. What was the moment that you knew it was time for a change?
The honest answer was sat in a swimming pool in Spain one day. But the lead up to that swimming pool in Spain was a period of quite challenging personal situation with sick parents and super demanding jobs. And one of the things that I'd remembered was that coaching had been a big part of my career in terms of supporting other people. But I hadn't any kind of qualification in it. My wife was working at a big organisation. She was looking to change what she was doing. She'd been on some coaching qualification courses. And I just thought, you know what, I want a piece of that. And we were chatting with some friends at a swimming pool in Spain, like I said, about different things that was going on in our lives at the time and what COVID had been like for us and all these sorts of things. And do you know what, it just felt like the right time to do something different. But yeah, it was, my missus is doing that, I want a piece of that.
Fair. And you'd been doing the tax stuff for a long time. I'm hoping we're going to cover that a bit later. What was it that got you into that in the first place? We just literally said you used to be a DJ before you were a tax man. Like before you were well, I say you're the tax man. You're not the tax man.
No, I'm not.
You were a person who was working to supply stuff for the tax man from a company, right? That's what you were doing in the short of it. I mean, there's probably a longer explanation.
Yeah.
But what was the thing that got you into that? And is there an early sort of, were you a math magician at school or whatever it was?
That's a really good question, because until the day that I got the offer through from this particular firm to work in tax, I didn't have a clue what that was all about. What I did know was that I wanted to be working at 18. So I went to college, got my A-levels and wanted to go into work. And kind of up until that point, I'd been your kind of traditional 80s kid that, had done the milk rounds and, delivered newspapers and worked in shops and pot washed, done all these sorts of things. So the ability to work somewhere and, earn a good living was actually really important. I saw that as freedom, as opportunity. And so my dad was in finance. Finance was kind of a natural fit. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in finance. I looked at what a lot of my friends would have done, things like working in banks and working in insurance. But I studied accountancy at A-level, really enjoyed it, applied for a couple of jobs, and then came across this advert in the Evening Standard, as it was back then, that this particular firm, which was quite a big firm, were looking to take on A-level students as part of a program to qualify in tax. And I thought, you know what, I need to find out more about this. It seemed very progressive at the time. A lot of those big firms back then were looking to recruit graduates, so that was a path that wasn't going to be open for me. And so the opportunity came up, went to the interview. There are a couple of things that they could have offered me. One was in insolvency, which is kind of bankrupt businesses, and the other one was in tax. And it was a very simple decision. as an 18-year-old, I saw insolvency as something that goes up and down. Tax, well, we all pay it, right? And I figured that it would be there my whole career. And do you know what? I didn't know what it was at the time, but I absolutely loved the time that I spent in that world.
Yeah, I'm interested to get into that because everybody hates paying tax. Like, I don't know a person that enjoys paying tax. And I get why we pay tax, and there's a lot of podcasts and a lot of talk at the moment about who pays the most tax and what percentage of people pay what percentage of tax, and seemingly the super rich people pay most of the tax and the not very rich people pay not as much of the sort of gross tax within the sort of the UK. But what I want to get into is the sort of financial well-being side, and sort of a bit of self-improvement is sort of an overriding journey in your overrun theme in your journey. What is it that most people misunderstand about money and their emotional relationship to it?
That's a great question. I think most people misunderstand that when I think about money a bit like I think about DNA. It's kind of ingrained within you, and that DNA is kind of there, and we don't necessarily understand what our own money DNA looks like. And what do I mean by that? We don't understand what our ancestors were talking about when it came to money. We don't understand how our parents or carers were directing us around money when we were growing up, the stories that we were listening to as kids around money, some of the language that was used. I do some financial well-being programs, and one of the examples I often use is the see a penny, pick it up all day long, you'll have good luck. Well, that's a kind of a positive message. But what I heard was, don't pick that coin up, it's dirty. It's a very negative message. And it's very, very small details, but these are the things that kind of log in our minds, in our subconscious, and often that's formed at a very, very young age. The community that we live in, the sorts of people that we're around, as we grow up, how we support our children through money. These are all things that have an impact on how we as individuals handle our own money, and in particular handle our emotions around money. Yeah.
It's interesting that you talk about it's almost like the foundation that you have with money, because I haven't come from money at all. I lived on I started my life on a little council estate in Shoebury, and it is that. You'd hear people saying, look after the pennies and the pounds will save themselves, all of those little phrases. Yeah. But then they weren't living out what they were actually saying. My mum was always very good with money. She used to work in a bank. But as a single mum, she didn't have much money. So she would, she just wouldn't have much because, we never went without. Me and my brother, are sort of close in age, and my other brother was sort of 10, 11 years younger than us. So it's a bit of a different one. But, my mum had me when she was very young and had my brother 3 years after. So she had 2 kids by the age of 20. And you'd hear people saying, find a penny, pick it up all day long, you have good luck, or look after the pennies and the pounds, all that stuff. But then they're acting like weekend millionaires. They get paid on a Friday and all their money's gone by Monday. Yep. How does that manifest emotionally? Because how do you get to that? Is that sort of an ingrained thing that you have, or is it something that just happens?
It goes back to the DNA thing for me. I think it's something that's formed in our subconscious before the age of 7, and when situations come up as adults, this little monkey pops up on your shoulder and says, remember me? Remember what it was like when you were a kid? Remember that situation? And unless we can work with that and understand ourselves better, this is any emotional situation. We just so happen to be talking about money here, but it's about working on yourself and understanding what your triggers are. What triggers you to spend? What triggers you to save? What triggers you to go out on that bender at the pub on a Saturday night and blow your wages? Until you start to understand what those triggers are, it's really hard to then try and do something about it. But I'm like you. My I've done my family tree a few years ago, and we came as a family of labourers in Bedfordshire, and we came into London on the trains, and my granddad was a milkman and all this kind of stuff. So my dad was the first person in our family, direct family, who got involved in financial services. So I got to see the generation before, Nan in a council flat. She was part of that generation that were able to buy their flats. So that was really early on in my life. And you see all these little things happening around you that have an impact. And certainly I ask myself the question, what would I do in that scenario? What makes me different to you? What's the positives out of that situation? What are the negatives out of that situation? How can I learn from this and from watching others? And you talk about the kind of weekend millionaires, whatever level of earning you're at. And I know that there's a big push in supporting apprentices with Site Ready Solutions. But whatever level of earning you're at, you're only earning what you're earning. So what's really important is how do you then manage both the growth of that earning, but also what you're spending at that particular moment in time. And I see it in the profession I come from, where people, let's be right, are earning really good money, and yet they'll get to the end of the month and it's all gone. So it kind of in some ways doesn't matter what you're earning. The point is, how do you manage that money in a way that suits you and also helps set you up for the future? Because that's the other part of this. You might be all right now, but who knows what's coming tomorrow that's going to have an impact. And COVID is a great example of that. People that were unable to work, how did they support themselves through that? Fortunately, the government put some money on the table to do that. But we don't know what our insurance policy is that's going to help us out when we get stuck. So being able to get a better sense of your money today, but also think about it for the future, which might be an aspirational statement, but nevertheless, I think is a really important thing that people should be thinking about. What is your future like?
Well, I wasn't going to go here, but talk me through the nuts and bolts of that. Because it seems that the people that watch this podcast generally are of sort of director level, actually. It was sort of set out to be your everyman podcast, but we seem to be getting sort of directors and CEOs and stuff watching. But if I were, and I think the principles are probably the same whoever you are, but if I were just your average Joe out there earning my average money, what does that look like for me? How do I sort of protect for the future? Like what are the actual nuts and bolts? Yeah. What if I had a salary of £38,000? Is that? But I don't even know what the average salary is now. Say 38 grand. Mm-hmm. Talk me through percentages of how I can actually safeguard myself for the future.
That's a really good question. And one thing I want to say before I answer the question is, you might need to work up to this. This isn't necessarily something that you're going to be able to deal with when you next get paid. But if you start to think about the principles of it, you can work up to it. So one really good and strong principle is to pay yourself first, particularly if it's your own business. And often I see people that don't do that. They'll look after everyone else, from suppliers to staff, before they pay themselves. And of course, if they disappear out of the business, then that foundation that either started the business or is running it today starts to weaken. And so it's really important that you do pay yourself first. I'm not talking about necessarily, stripping the business bare, but I'm talking about giving yourself a decent wage for the work that you're doing for that business. So paying yourself first. There's some science around this, and one of the suggestions is that you should be looking to save about 20% of your net pay. As I say, that might not be possible next time you get paid, but what about starting with 1%? And then the next month, 1.5%, and the month after 2%. And you'll slowly get there. The other thing is being able to do that when you get paid. What typically happens is people do that 20% or whatever their percentage is at the end of the month with what's left. And of course, for many of us, there's always a reason to spend our money. And for many of us, we find that we get to the end of that month, and funnily enough, there's nothing left to save. So again, with technology, with simple things like direct debits and standing orders, make sure that money goes out of your bank account on the day that you get paid. Treat it like your rent or your mortgage. Treat it like the other expenditure that you have to incur, because at the end of the day, you're investing in your future by doing this. So that's really important. Then in terms of the balance, again, you may have seen this elsewhere, but roughly look to say maybe half of your money should be on things you need to spend. So that might be your living costs, your food, and 30% for the wants. And look, these are guidelines. Everyone's going to be different. The point is to start. And we had a conversation with my daughter's boyfriend some time ago when he was still at university, and typical of that situation, in student debt, not really bringing any money in either, kind of struggling when he shouldn't have been. And we just said to him, I'll tell you what, why don't you just put put a pound in a jam jar every day, sorry. And by the end of the year, you got 365 quid that you didn't have before you started. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be big numbers. The important bit is to get started.
Yeah. I love it. I actually love it. The idea that paying yourself first, it feels like when you're on a plane and they say, the masks come down and they say, when you've got a child with you, put yours on and then put your child's on, because your child, nobody's going to be able to do anything if you're asphyxiated there on the chair, are they? And the idea that I look at it as £10. So for every, and breaking it down for your average Joe, I guess, for every £10 you earn, you put £20, you put £2 into a pot to save, keep it away, £5, into your expenditure to live, and then £3 you can do what you like with it. And that seems really easy to do, but I feel like, and if everyone else is sort of anything like me, I feel like I spend more than 50% of my wages on just living. And I guess only I and my wife are in control of my money. So, if you're in a place, I've been in, well, I say relative huge amounts of debt before. I've run up, when I was at uni or drama school, they gave me an overdraft. That's free money. And then they give me a credit card. Well, that's free money too. But then the free money becomes not very free anymore when you've run up, you've maxed out your credit card, you've maxed out your overdraft, you finish drama school, and then they're like, oh, by the way, we want all that money back, and if you don't, we're going to charge you like 30% on top of whatever we've given you. So my minimum payment doesn't even cover what you're, what you're charging me in interest. How does someone, and it sounds really easy, how does someone live within their means?
Again, we're all individuals at the end of the day. We're all doing what we need to do to get by. We're working, we're supporting our family, we're trying to have a good time when we can. I think to get by, we can get really kind of scientific at this and say, well, where's a good place to start? Well, a good place to start is look at your bank account, look at your credit card statement. Where's your money going? And do that very simple, but maybe painful in some cases, exercise of just understanding what you're spending your money on. As a financial coach, that's one of the things that I will get my clients to do, is to actually do that kind of diligence on themselves. And then it's about asking yourself this question: why is that particular expenditure important to me? What's the value that I'm getting from spending that money on that thing? And this isn't to say you should stop things. So, I hear sometimes people talking about, why are you spending £3 on a coffee every morning? Or why do you belong to the gym that you're not using? Look, this isn't about stopping the things that you're enjoying doing. As I said, that kind of 50, 30, 20 split we talked about is there to allow us to have a bit of fun in our lives as well. But things sneak into our bank account. It's so easy now. Everything's on our phone. Everything's tap, 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 tap. I was talking about this actually a couple of nights ago with a friend. You used to go out, you'd have money in your pocket, cash in your pocket. At the end of the night, you just needed to make sure you had your cab home or realise you were going to walk, and you couldn't spend any more than that. It's so much more difficult these days to control that. There are ways, but it's so much more difficult to control that. So, like I say, this isn't about saying don't have a good night out. What this is about is recognizing what the value of that good night out to you looks like, and being able to understand it. And as I say, starting with a bit of an audit on your expenditure is a good, might be a bit boring, but it's a good way to really start to understand you. What makes you tick? Why does a gym membership work for you? Look, if you're a member of a gym and you're using it, and the reason you go to the gym is because you're looking after your mental health, you're looking after your physical health, you want to be strong as you get older, then why is that a bad way to spend your money? If you're a member of a gym and you're not using it, well, then you're wasting your money, right?
The most expensive gym membership is the one you don't use, right?
Absolutely. And like I say, these things do sneak into our habits. And this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about habits. What are the habits that are good for us, that serve us? What are the habits that are bad for us, that sabotage us? And it's about trying to firstly understand that, and then secondly trying to do something about it.
That's really interesting, because it goes back to before the 7-year-old. Most of your habits are built before you're 7 years old, right? And yeah, I love everything about what you just said. And it is, I've recently done the audit of my bank account, and I realised that I was spending 15% of my net income on coffee shops.
Right.
That is a lot of my net income. Coffee shops are making a fair amount of money out of me. And I realised that had come from, because you do have to look in, you have to look introspectively, don't you? And why am I spending this amount of money on something that isn't even like that good? Coffee's great, don't get me wrong, and I like nice coffee. I don't need to spend like 15% of my income on it. No. And I did a lot of thinking about it. And actually, for me, it was because when I was younger, that was what normal people did. So we didn't have the money to go into coffee shops and cafes and things like that. So I'd walk past the cafe and look at everyone having a lovely time. And now that's and it sounds daft, but that's my benchmark of I'm a normal person. I am earning enough money, because I haven't always been able to do that either. I'm really fortunate to work in an industry that pays pretty well. And I can afford it. My wife would say, in fact, she doesn't watch the podcast, and I hope she doesn't watch it. But she knows how much I spend. I've got nothing to hide about that. And I explained to her why, and she then understood. And she was like, okay, if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. It's not. So we have cut that down. It's at about 6% now. So which is considerably less than 15, right? But that's the really interesting thing about money, is that it's really individual, which I guess is why you do so much work with the people that you do, because it's such an individual thing, and you can't blanket. We sort of have blanketed advice, general principles, but that's why you work individually, one-to-one with people. You work with people on alignment. Can you just sort of explain what that is? But then, just explain. If you could just explain what that is, and then I'll we can open up to that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's something that I've come to fairly recently in terms of my own understanding of me. So align is something that I've trademarked, and it's effectively a coaching framework. And that coaching framework is built around what I call the 6 M's. And the way that I see these 6 M's is, if they're all kind of in alignment, we're probably pretty set fair in terms of how we're living our lives. If one of those things is out of alignment, we might be a little bit disrupted. We might not be performing at our best. We might not be having our best days, but stuff happens. If you start to get 2 or 3 things out of alignment, then all of a sudden we find ourselves in a different headspace. We find ourselves getting more frustrated, more perplexed about stuff, maybe not performing at work as well as we could otherwise do, not seeing life for what it really is, which is good and fun. And so that's where I came to. And the genesis of that actually was, I got involved in a men's mental health charity called Andy's Man Club a few years ago. And I started a group locally to where I live. And what I was seeing through facilitating that group was guys coming to talk, guys that were typically in a pretty bad place at the point that they were coming to talk, And it wasn't that there was necessarily one thing that was happening. It was that multiple big things were happening all at once. So coaching for me is on the spectrum of mental health. It's just a much earlier intervention. And so the way I look at Align is to say, I want to try and, through my professional work, help people not get to a point where they need to use an Andy's Man Club. I want them to be able to become more self-aware, to be able to understand themselves better before they get to a point where it's much more difficult to do that. And by the way, I'm not advocating that you shouldn't use an Andy's Man Club if you need it. Absolutely, you should do. But this is really about maybe your listeners who are generally in a pretty good place right now, running successful businesses or working their way up the career tree in the work that they do. But nonetheless, still need a bit of support to make sure that that's all going in the right direction. So what do I mean by the 6 M's? So the 6 M's are meaning, so a sense of purpose, money, so a sense of wealth, and that's not to be confused with richness. That's a sense of wealth as it relates to you. So where are you right now? What makes you feel financially comfortable, happy, that you're able to live within your own skin, that you're living with your own means, that you've got an eye on the future. You might not be doing all of these things right now, but you're kind of okay with all of that stuff.
It's to being able to go sit in a coffee shop if I want to.
Exactly. Being able to basically do what you want to do if you can. Mind. So that's a sense of health, if you like. I'm not talking here about kind of therapy. What I'm talking here about is things that we come up against in our day-to-day lives that just make things a little bit tricky. So a couple of examples, particularly from the world that I tend to work in. Confidence. If you're feeling confident, you're probably feeling good. If you're not feeling confident, you're probably not feeling good. But you can coach people around confidence. You can coach people to help them understand the things that make them feel better about themselves, that make them go into a room and perform. So that's mind. You've then got membership. So what do I mean by membership? That's a sense of kind of belonging. So that can be anything from your nuclear family, so your partner, your kids, your extended family. It could be getting involved in charity work. It could be getting involved in the third sector. It could be belonging to your local golf club or sports club. Things where you're feeling like you're a member of something, of some kind of community that gives you strength beyond yourself. And most people are by their nature, they want community. If you look at our ancestry, it started with these small villages of people
tribes, right?
that, as tribes, had to look after themselves. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. It's kind of, what's your tribe? Have you got a tribe? How does it benefit for you? How does it? Again, I use these words a lot: serve and sabotage. Not all tribes are great. So the coaching around that is to try and understand what that looks like for you, to think about what might be possible if you're struggling with identifying that, and to start to put in place some steps to change things if that's what you need to do.
Yeah, your tribe, I guess your tribe is, if you're part of a tribe, I go to church, part of my tribe is my church family, right? Yes. And we went camping the last weekend, a lot of us went camping together, and the weekend just gone, we all took our kids on a forest school thing, which we do together, and we bond and we go in relationship, which I guess is what you're like, the whole membership of it. I opt into that, but you could opt into a group of friends who love going out getting mashed every week and spending all of their money on a Friday night.
Could be.
That's maybe not the most healthy. You can maybe, if you wanted to, you could do that once a month. but I wouldn't necessarily subscribe, or become a member of that tribe 24/7, because it's probably not the most wholesome thing you could do,
But the point is to fend off loneliness. The point is to fend off the situation that we all find ourselves in, including myself, where, you have friendship groups when you're younger, and then with the passage of time, you're working hard, you're working up the career ladder, you're building your own family, maybe you move area, maybe you find yourself somewhere completely different to where your tribe is. These are all things that kind of come along and get in the way of thinking about membership as a way of kind of looking after yourself. And you're absolutely right. This is horses for courses, what works for you. But the point is, find something, because that all goes back to alignment as far as I can see it. The fifth M is movement. And I'm not a personal trainer. That's not what I'm talking about here. But it's about, again, movement's one of those things that people tend to give up on as they get engrossed in the other parts of their lives. It's probably one of the reasons why people do have gym memberships. They're trying to satisfy that, that mental desire to be active, even though they're not being active. So again, it's about trying to understand how you can fit movement into your busy life. It's not necessarily about, being super trim or super strong, although ultimately that could be what comes out of doing it. But, you've got to remember what I'm talking about here is executives and, usually more senior people who've got, super responsible jobs, super stressful jobs, maybe don't see their families as much as they otherwise should do or could do. And so things like movement become less important. And again, one thing I just want to kind of touch on here, all of this, by the way, impacts us to different extents at different stages of our lives. When you're young and just looking after yourself, you're probably covering all of this stuff off naturally. But as you get older and life gets in the way, some things start to drop off. And then the sixth M is momentum. And that's all about this kind of sense of growth, this sense of always moving forward, always trying to, I'm not talking about perfectionism in what I'm about to say, but always just trying to be the best version of yourself that you can be and giving yourself some momentum around that. So, align is achieving lasting impact, growth and nexus. It's a few words strung together, but that's really what we're talking about. It's that lasting connection that we've got with these things that my coaching program is there to try and support people around.
Can you share a moment with us where you found your financial success conflicted with your sort of deeper values? Because, your 6 M's sort of a pretty, if you're pretty level, you'd imagine that you would try and align your success with your values. Has there ever been a time that you found that you don't have to necessarily go into complete specifics, but have you found a time when that's not been the case for you?
Yeah, for sure. I can think of a couple. So one would have been earlier on in my career where, let's be right, when you first start earning money, and accountancy-based trainees do earn pretty good money when they start off, but you're in an environment where there's people earning a hell of a lot of money and doing a hell of a lot of really good, exciting, fun things. So like a lot of younger people at that time, as you've already alluded to yourself, a credit card was a bit of a savior for me. And I was enjoying things that I probably couldn't have afforded at the time. And it was only through a conversation with my wife's husband, that's me, with my wife's dad, that actually he helped me get on the straight and narrow at that. And look, we're not talking lots and lots and lots of money here, but to your point of misalignment, I'd allowed myself to be seduced by this industry, and I was only on rung one of the ladder. And I think that's quite easy in most industries to think ahead and to, because you do, in a profession like accountancy, you know that you get professional exams, and when you get qualified, your pay goes up, and as you progress through the firm, so you're kind of almost predicting where you're going to be. And that's the kind of the mindset shift. So going back to the money habits and the money DNA, if you're not conditioned to that and what that looks like, and I wasn't, because that's not how I was brought up either, it's very easy to be seduced and find it. So that was a point where I would say it wasn't, my values were not aligned with what was happening with my money. Fortunately, I had some help to change that and did change that fairly quickly. The second time was probably at a more senior level. So this is where actually everyone's doing pretty well, and we were doing pretty well, kind of, you might say, living the dream in terms of some of the stuff that we were doing. I remember having a conversation with a partner that I used to work with at one of the big accountancy firms, who was probably approaching his 50s at the time, and I would have been in my early to mid 30s. And I remember it even now. He said, "Look, I want to retire in a few years' time, and when I retire, I want to be earning in retirement what I'm earning in work. I want to be earning in retirement what I'm earning in work." Most people don't think like that. And I thought, wow, you get paid a shed load of money. How are you going to make that happen? And it was a moment where I connected what we were doing with our lives at the time and how we were spending our money with, we need to take stock here, because we're not going to be able to do that if we carry on living our lives as we are right now. And that was a point when, and it's some of the stuff that I talk about, again, particularly with professionals and business owners, around what's your next step and how can you live your life at that next step in the best way possible. Who knows what would have happened had we not made that readjustment? And obviously there's a lot of other factors come in the meantime, so this isn't a straight line, by the way. Life is wiggly, right? So we might have been okay. Who knows? No one knows the answer to that question. But what I did also have in the back of my mind is my dad was on a pretty good trajectory when he was in the banking world, and in his 50s got hit with 4 redundancies, and that changed his outlook on things massively. And I'd always said to myself, I'm not going to be seduced into a world of work where that might happen to me. It's one of the reasons that I decided to leave the big corporate in my mid-40s. I could have stayed, I could have carried on. Who knows what the right choice was? Some might have called that decision brave, others might call it stupid. But I wanted to be more in control of what happened next. And that was a really important kind of factor. But coming back to coaching, had that decision not been made, which at that time for me would have been about 15, 16 years ago, so kind of late 30s, early 40s, would I have been able to make that switch out now? Or would I have still been, drawing my check and keeping on in the world that I was in? Look, the answer is none of us know the answers to these questions. What this is about is giving yourself opportunities, giving yourself the best set of kind of facts to live your best life in the future and have some semblance of control over that. I'm not a narcissist. We're not talking about that level of control. But, when I talk about that £20 in the 100 that we were talking about right at the beginning of the interview, it's that £20 that buys you the future opportunity. So the sooner you start thinking about that, it's just going to help you.
Well, as you just said, you were the group head of tax at a major global infrastructure firm. From the outside, that's success. What did it feel like from the inside?
Well, from the outside, that was success. If I look at where I ultimately wanted to get to as a tax advisor, which, as I say, it's not a well understood industry. It's got lots of negative connotation in terms of what it actually looks like. But what it meant for me was a profession that allowed me to get all over anything. If you look at individuals, we all pay tax. It underpins lots of what we do in our lives. If you look at businesses, they pay tax. It underpins what they do in their organisations. So as a tax advisor, I was with the main board, stakeholders. It was stuff that was we were talking about strategy. We were talking about buying and selling businesses. We were talking about what exit might look like. Yes, I was a small piece of that puzzle, but it got me into conversations that went well beyond. Becoming the group head of tax was massively aspirational for me, and the fact that I got it and then decided not that many years later that was the point to leave, and I can come back to that if you want to. And the organisation that I worked for was a great organisation. We did some brilliant stuff, and I didn't want to go and leave and work for a competitor. But it was stressful. I was with them for 10 years, and in the last couple of years, we were looking at or the owners were looking at selling. So we were owned by a private equity firm. We're looking at selling, and as group head of tax, as well as doing my day job, which was massively demanding, looking after the compliance and the strategy and the advisory and the deals and the team from a tax point of view, we were also working on the strategy around the exit for the owners. So were we going to be selling to another private equity house? Were we going to be listing on the stock market? All of the due diligence that needs to happen around that, all of the planning, all of the structuring, all of the conversations, meetings. You're effectively doing two jobs at that point in time. And not only that, two quite stressful jobs. So yes, on the outside, that is success. On the inside, it was also success. But as I'm sure a lot of listeners will appreciate, success doesn't come for free. It comes with hard work and opportunity. And I feel that I put both of those things into building that career. Mm-hmm. But it reached its natural course. And for the reasons that I said, that was the point at which to say, fulfill a lifelong ambition of working for myself. And also leaving, from my perspective, at what I felt was the top of my game. I think that's it's something that people find really, really difficult, particularly successful people, is to walk out when things are good. Often it's the other way around. But I wanted to leave at a point where things were good. The business had just IPO'd. I left 6 months after that. You know, things going forward were going to be different. But it was a really strong business, investing in, as you said, infrastructure, property, renewable energy, all around the world. Really exciting business to be involved in. But I'd been there 10 years. I'd been involved in that sector for, crikey, probably twice as long as that. And it was time.
And you're at the top of your game at that point. I'm interested because you, from the top of, essentially the top of the mountain, you have a really clear view of everything that goes on in there. What I'm interested in is what myths people tell themselves about leadership and success that don't serve them.
Look, a lot of what we're talking about today is really personal for people, and we've all got our own narrative going on as to what success looks like for us, what it might look like in the future, the myths, the truths. So it's all very personal. So obviously what I'm about to say is my version of that. So it may be different for others, and it almost certainly will be different for others. But I think one of the myths is this will last forever. And nothing does. So it kind of goes back, joining some of the dots with what we're talking about with money. I think you need to build that stockpile, whatever that looks like for you, while things are good, because you just don't know what's going to be around the corner. So I think that's probably the most important one, is that you just don't know when it's going to end, but it will do. For me, being in control of that timing was important. That sat with a lot of my values. What else? I think the way people measure their success comes in here. Some people measure their success by leaving the home at 5 a.m. and getting back at 11 o'clock at night every day, and doing that for years and years and years and years and years, and then getting to the end, whatever that looks like, and realizing actually there's a lot lost along the way. And I can think of lots of examples of that, where that was how they operated and saw that as success, and some still do. For me, that was not a measure of success. We were early advocates of home working back in the early noughties, my wife and I. She continued to work after we had our kids. That was a very open conversation that we had at the time. And as it happened, it was massively the right right decision for all of us. Didn't know that at the time, but that's what it turned out to be. So for me, family is important. For me, out of work time is as important as in work time. Look, work at the end of the day is yes, it must be enjoyable. It should be furthering you. It should be increasing your ability to be a good person and live your best life. But it is work. And there's so much more to life outside of work, in my view.
Well, That does bring us really nicely. It's almost like we planned it. The outside of work, you started the Basildon. Do we call it a branch of Andy's Man Club? Well, let's call it a branch.
Okay.
We're in finance. You know, we have
Yep.
branches of banks.
Yep.
We're like, why not branches of Andy's Man Club?
Yeah.
You've talked a little bit about what that is, but what I want to know is what that experience opened up for you.
Well, this is a subject that's really deep and close for me. So let's deal with the kind of factual side of it for a second. So Andy's Man Club was a charity that I knew nothing about until in lockdown. Somebody that I used to network with, somebody that I'd see very often, somebody that was always the life and soul of the party, walk into events and light the room up, always having a laugh and a giggle, put a photo of themselves on LinkedIn in the Priory, having tried to take their own life and in recovery. And all I could think when I saw that picture was, who knew? Who knew? And that particular guy, his name was Darren, and he came out of the Priory. He found this charity online because it was COVID at the time. There was a men's suicide prevention charity, a mental health charity called Andy's Man Club. And at the time, there were a small number of groups. I think it was around about 50 groups across the country. The charity had been formed, in fact, it was 9 years old, only yesterday, I think. So fairly new, but born out of a really sad situation. A guy, 23-year-old guy called Andy, who took his life, and family didn't know anything about it. Realised that they needed to get local guys talking. Started a group in a coffee shop in Halifax, which is where they were based. 9 blokes turned up to that first meeting. They had ambition to grow it, but I don't think any of them could have really believed where it is now, which is they've just opened a 300th group, and over 6,000 guys turn up to meetings. So you can kind of see the impact just from the scale and the speed of that growth. But anyway, going back to Darren's story, he at the time joined their online group, which was all they could run during lockdown, and it was he said it himself, it was his saving grace actually, and it helped him so much in that period. And they were very much a northern charity, and he asked if he could set up a group in Essex, which is where he was. So he started a group in Southend, it's at Southend United, and then started another one in Chelmsford. And at the time that this post went out, which was after these things had happened, I said to Darren, I'm just inspired by where you've come to from where you were and how that charity has supported you, and if we can get a group set up in Basildon, can we do that? And obviously he spoke to the trustees and the people up in Halifax, and we became the 100th group. So this was only 3 years ago, and I had no idea what that would look like. I'd just been through a period personally myself where we lost three of our 4 parents in a fairly quick space of time. I was not suicidal, but I was definitely challenged by that situation. And I could see how easy it could be for people to slide. And turning up to that first session of the Basildon group with no idea where that would go, we called it the magic in the room. Guys that had never met were sharing their deepest, darkest truths. How does that happen? How does that happen? And I still don't quite know how that happens, but it does. And so I'm really proud to have got that group started. It's still going. I don't attend it anymore. My own life has moved on from that. But, most of these groups average somewhere between 20 and 30 guys every Monday night. And Basildon's still supporting that number of people. The faces change week to week. But the ethos, the principles, the culture, the success stories, they continue. So I'm not sure if I answered your question there, but it was a big truth for me getting involved in that group in terms of just understanding some things that perhaps I didn't beforehand, understanding myself better for sure. And it was definitely the nudge that took me into coaching.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because that is deep, and blokes don't talk to each other enough. I've been talking to one of my friends who is in sort of big pharma. He does L&D in like a huge pharmaceutical company, and he just moved jobs because it just broke him. And we've been talking about he went to like a men's retreat in Scotland, and they walked and talked and had fires and manly stuff. But doesn't seem to be enough of that around. And we're thinking about starting something locally. And actually, I might now reach out to Andy's Man Club.
Absolutely.
Because I guess there's a formula that they sort of encourage and the way but I guess each group is unique in its own way. So I guess one meets at Southend United. There's no reason it couldn't meet in the Woods or I guess there's nowhere it has to meet.
They do have some kind of guidelines about where the groups meet, because obviously the subject that we're talking about is a difficult one. They need to be a bit careful around things like venues that have got alcohol, because some of the guys there may be there because of alcohol dependency or drug dependency. So they have got some kind of guidelines, but yeah, absolutely. And I can put you in touch with the guy who looks after London and the South if you want to do that.
In case you didn't know, in construction, trust is everything. You trust your team to show up, you trust your tools to perform, and when the pressure's on, you trust your supplier to deliver. That's where Grayson Building Products come in. They've been doing this since 1921, and they've built more than just a business. They've built relationships, expertise, and a reputation that is earned, not claimed. With over 50,000 products in stock and a team of specialists who genuinely understand the craft, Grayson is there. Not just when you order, but when things get complex. It's more than just a price. It's partnership. It's peace of mind. If you want a supplier that moves like part of your team, visit grayson.gb.com and see what real service feels like. Tell me about Business Uncorked. Where did that come from?
Well, I guess it comes back to M for membership for me. You touched on my old DJ days. I mean, I don't reflect too often on those, but at the end of the day, that was a time in my life that was great fun. And I used to love putting events on. We used to run a local event in a pub where I lived at the time in Epping, and we were the pub that people would go to before they went down to the Epping Forest Country Club for their proper night out. So as young kids, which we were, let's face it, at the time, that was great. Absolutely loved it. But we'd also put on events at the local, hall, like parties, DJing stuff. So I've always had this thing in me about events, and I've never wanted to. Actually, this isn't true. Crikey, we really are getting to it now. When I grew up, I wanted to be the guy that organised Live Aid. If I could have done the job of my dreams, that would have been my job and my dreams. But it didn't happen, so I'm not going to go back to that. But I've always had in the back of my mind that events is an important part of what I do. So I set up a business networking group around sport about 10 years ago. No great shakes, but it was a great way to get people together. It was a great way to have a bit of fun. In fact, this is where I met Darren. Darren came along to that group as well. But COVID, we really struggled because we're a sport-based activity inside. We basically had to call time on it. Tried it again for a while, but it never really got back to where it was beforehand. But I still had the itch. I still had the itch to do my own thing when it came to networking, to talking about tribe, to have my own tribe, if you like. I don't mean that egotistically, but just being around like-minded people that enjoyed the same kind of things.
I know what you mean. Not you say your own tribe. You don't mean your tribe. No. You mean the tribe that you belong to.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah, and we frequent a local wine bar, which is fantastic, little venue. It feels like a home from home. And one night we walked past on a Monday night, and there were a group of ladies in this place, and it's normally closed on a Monday night. So the next time I was in, I asked what that was all about, and he said it was a business networking group. And I thought, okay. He said it was really interesting. He said, you know, there were lots of women in there. He said they weren't really using the facilities; they were just using it as a base for their meeting, and they were doing this and they were doing that. I said, guys, you've got such a great offer. They do this kind of bottomless brunch offer, sort of once a month or so. Wouldn't it be great if we can start bringing some of the local business community into this venue, avail themselves of the bottomless brunch, get to know each other, have a good time, soften some of the edges around networking, because networking can be quite stiff, particularly some networking environments. And by the way, before I say anything else, I'm not advocating drinking here, but it is part of the network. But we drink good wine, we eat lovely cheese, we just really for a couple of hours just get on. And started it a few months ago, and we're already creating a core of people that love it as well. And we'll see what happens. But it's my way of kind of scratching an itch around community and bringing people together in a way that is linked to what they're doing, i.e. their business, but not linked. It's a bit of fun too.
I hate networking.
So do I, which is why I like doing my own networking.
That's exactly it. My question is, because I feel like networking is particularly broken. You go to these stuffy events where they shove you in probably some form of like conference center, and you know, and there's 500 people there, or there's like 5, and you're like, okay, well, I'm only ever going to speak to probably 5 people because they're the people that are sitting around. So I feel like that's particularly broken. And you seem like a solution. You're certainly a solutions guy. What was Business Uncorked as a solution to a problem? I know that you're sort of scratching the itch of finding your tribe. And you know, and I advocate for that hugely. If you can't find a tribe, make a tribe. Yeah. That's sort of how I see it. But you've made it around networking, which is a particularly dull, boring, especially with LinkedIn now. It's like LinkedIn is just like a reel of look at my best stuff. It's like the Instagram of business. Like look at my best life, or oh, woe is me. You know, there's nothing really in between. How does Business Uncorked sort of change that? What problem were you solving essentially?
I was probably solving a problem of me, actually. So what do I mean by that? When I was working in London, what I saw, you know, a lot of the best business relationships were formed over sport, or they were formed over nice meals, or they were formed over the arts or culture or travel. What they weren't formed around was 500 people sitting in a room drinking crap coffee, or, you know, dodgy sandwiches, or 5 people standing up and like wallflowers around the edge of a room and not really wanting to talk to each other, but knowing that they needed to tick a box of networking. So I'd kind of come from a world where I'd seen it really work. And one of the things I noticed really early on, you know, sort of going back 10 years now, was there wasn't very much of the other locally. It's why I started the Squash Club Business Network. It was because there was nothing really around sport. I didn't want to be I don't like standing in rooms of lots and lots of people. That's one of the things that triggers my own anxieties. So that didn't work for me. And in a room of 5 people, who knows, is it going to work or not? I don't know. But anyway, the solution it was trying to solve was that connection between the good things in life, the things that most of us enjoy when we're not working, brought into a work context for like-minded people that over time will build strong relationships. This isn't a quick fix. This isn't a sales forum. It's about building strong relationships that will serve each other at various points in time, not all at once, over a period of time. And the sorts of people that I get coming along to Business Uncorked are business owners, small business owners, business leaders. So that could be senior people in organisations and professionals. We don't talk about any of that stuff. We just chat, and it's wonderful.
What makes a good business conversation? Because I've been to enough networking events, and we talked about it before. I hate small talk. Can't stand it. I know it's essential, but as you say, it's like take me out on a date before before you take me home, sort of thing. But what makes a good conversation? How do I? I'm at my first networking event. I'm at my first Business Uncorked. How do I, as somebody, I'm fortunately not this type of person, but if I was someone who doesn't enjoy crowds of people, doesn't enjoy networking, but likes, nice wine or nice sort of grape juice or what, fake wine, because I gave up drinking for a long time and I've not started drinking again. That sounds really bad, doesn't it? But I don't not drink anymore. Mm-hmm. But I like wine. I like cheese. How do I get into a conversation with somebody at one of your events?
Well, the best thing you can do as a host is introduce people. That, at the end of the day, you're in a privileged position organising events. You've got the list, right? You know who's in the room. If I think back to those 500 people in a room events, or even the 5, how many of those do you walk into the room and nobody comes up and says, by the way, you need to meet so-and-so, because I know you're going to get on. And funny enough, if someone comes up to you and says, I know you're going to get on, chances are you probably will. Mm. And the chances are that conversation won't be about work. You might ask what you do, but you'll quickly get on to family. You'll quickly get on to what you did at the weekend. You'll quickly get on to where you've been on holiday. You'll quickly get on to the things that you enjoy doing. And funnily enough, they're the things that are the pieces of the jigsaw that build the relationship. And work's just one of those pieces, right? So I went to something probably about a year ago now, and I'm not massively shy, but I'm not necessarily a self-starter in terms of walking into a room of people I don't know. And I went to this particular event, and I actually used it as a bit of a test to see if somebody would introduce me to other people if I sat on my own, and nobody did. So that for me is the big thing about getting these events going. You need people to put their trust in you is the first thing in coming, signing up to come along to an event. And if they're putting their trust in you, you need to then make sure that you're offering that connection. And whether that's 5 people or 500 people, if Business Uncorked becomes a group of 500 people, brilliant. If it stays a group of less than that, brilliant. What's important is that relationship building. Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting because volume is something that becomes difficult when there's only one of you, because there isn't a long enough night or long enough day for you to introduce 250 people to another 250 people. Like, it's almost impossible. But I guess as you grow, people, you can appoint welcomers or whatever you want to do. You can appoint the people who've been coming and are good at matching people with other people. Yeah. You can. Yeah, I guess that's how you grow, right?
It is, and I've got a good friend who lives locally, and he's my doorman, and his job is to welcome people in and to do exactly what I've just said. And I'm hosting. It's really important. Some people are natural extroverts, right? And they'll just go and talk to anybody. But actually, I think there's an awful lot of business people that are not. There's a reason that they sit in offices on their own. It's because they're introverted and shy, and maybe they don't say that out loud, but that may well be the case. So you need to help. You need to nudge. Mm.
When it comes to money and meaning, what's one truth that you think more people need to hear?
It's not always about money.
Okay. Unpack that for me.
So I'm a certified financial coach, and one of the things that we talked about a lot on the program is when people talk about money, what they're really talking about is their values. So it's not about the money, it's about their values, and the values play out around money. So let's unpack that a little bit. If say you're a natural overspender, what's the value that sits behind that? Going back to the money DNA, what's the money DNA? What's your ancestry? What's your family group? What's your tribe? What's your story that puts you in a place that says, I need that thing right now? So that's what I mean by that. It's starting to unpick some of that stuff, and understand actually what's driving the decisions that you're making around money from a values perspective.
That's super helpful, because I thought you were going to talk about money and you didn't. And actually, I think that is more helpful. Thank you, because a money answer would have just been like, yeah, cool, money. But actually getting to the back end of what it is that drives you is, I guess, the most important thing, right? Because people often think that money's a driver, but there's a reason, right? There's always the why behind because the money's just a what, right? Or a how. Yeah. It's not a why.
It's a tool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most of the time it's a very blunt tool. Yeah. Oh, no, thank you for that, because I thought you were going to go into a big explanation about money, and actually that you haven't, and I'm really pleased. If we want to find you, where can we find you? If where do I have to go to find you on the internet? I mean, LinkedIn's a place.
Yeah.
On the internet.
Yeah. I'm not a massive social media user, not professionally anyway. So I am on LinkedIn, as you'd expect. Have been for some time. So that's me personally. That's also Justin Walton Coaching and Consultancy, and also Business Uncorked. So I've got a couple of business pages there. My website is www.justinwalton.co.uk, and there you'll find some really useful tools, actually. I use some kind of health checks and scorecard-based approaches to help people get up the curve before they talk to me. So you can do a financial wellbeing health check on there completely free, if you were minded to, and there's other things like that on the website as well. For years I've held off blogging, but this year I decided that I need to tell people a bit more about me and my story. So there's a couple of things that are going on at the minute. One of them is a series of blog posts that link to a line, that link to those six M's, and they're kind of being dripped out. And also another one is a day in the life of, and I'll never tell you which day it is, but the essence of a day in the life of is to, going back to Andy's Man Club, one of the things we often suggest that guys do is journal. Get stuff out, get it on paper, give yourself an opportunity to sort of reflect down the line. So a day in the life of is my very public version of journaling, where I talk about a few of the things that I've been doing that day, and I connect it to the 6 M's. And it's really just an opportunity then in the future, I hope, for me to then look back and say, okay, it's all okay, right?
We have a closing tradition. Now, if you've watched one of our podcasts and got all the way to the end, then you'll know. But if you haven't, you won't. If you could pick anyone, and this is the reason is to get into your little black book of people.
Right.
If you could pick anyone to be sat in your chair, with me, for our viewership and listenership, who would you pick?
Someone I know.
Someone you could. It could be anyone. We've had Eddie Hearn from
right.
someone and various other people. It could be someone you know, or it could be someone maybe you don't know that you might like to get us on, might like to get on. But I mean, someone you know would be preferable, because then you can say.
There's a guy, I'm actually going on a boat with him this afternoon. We're taking a little trip down the Thames, which will be very, very nice. His name is Chris Dames. Mm-hmm. I've got to know Chris fairly recently. Chris is a financial advisor by background, but that's not the point. The point is that he's started his own podcast fairly recently called What Happens Next. And the essence of What Happens Next links very well actually with what I do. He comes at it very much from an advisory point of view. I come at it from a coaching point of view. And it's about getting people to start thinking about what happens next. Mm-hmm. So I think he'd be a great person for you to have.
Brilliant. Well, Justin, thank you so much for coming on. I love it. A conversation's worth having. This has certainly been a conversation worth having. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Bless you.
Cheers.
Thank you.